Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm rising today to speak to the former Ethics Commissioner's report called the Trudeau Report, which found that the Prime Minister has breached the Conflict of Interest Act in 4 separate ways. At the onset, I do want to say that I will be sharing my time with the Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd. Regrettably, at this point, Madam Speaker, I just have 10 minutes to speak, even though there is so much to be said. But let me start by summarizing why we are here and what has happened to get us to this point. 2 Christmases ago, it was right after the election, and Christmas holidays were here, and the Prime Minister dropped off the radar. Now, this is the Prime Minister who had just been elected on a campaign of openness and transparency, but the Prime Minister left somewhere and he would not tell anybody where he went. Now, if he had just been off on a holiday, maybe on a beach somewhere, he probably would have told the media and he would have told Canadians that he was on a holiday with his family. But for some reason, he was incredibly secretive and he didn't want anyone to know where he had gone on his Christmas holiday. Now, some enterprising members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery tracked the Prime Minister down, and they found out he was in the Bahamas. No doubt egged on by the Prime Minister's secrecy over the whole thing, these journalists kept digging. Now, Madam Speaker, it turns out that the Prime Minister wasn't just at the Bahamas at a resort somewhere that he'd paid for and was having a little holiday with his family. No, he was hanging out on a beautiful billionaire island, a private Caribbean island owned by the Aga Khan. Now, the Aga Khan does some very good work. He presides over organizations such as the Global Centre for Pluralism, which have associations, financial and otherwise dealings with the Government of Canada for decades. Again, the Aga Khan does very good work in Canada and around the world. But, Madam Speaker, that is irrelevant to the point that we are discussing today. The point is that the Aga Khan, a good individual who does very good work for Canadians, gets a whole lot of money from the Government of Canada to do this work. And the Prime Minister of Canada was on his island accepting a free vacation from him. Now, what this report has told us is that this was not the first time that the Prime Minister had taken a free vacation from the Aga Khan on the island. In fact, Christmas 2014, prior to being the Prime Minister, the member was there for a holiday. March 2016, family members there for a holiday. And then Christmas 2016, the private island holiday yet again. Wow, what an amazing so-called friendship to have. And that's the other interesting thing about this report. The Prime Minister tried to say for a year that this was a holiday being taken and accepted with a very good friend. But the Ethics Commissioner report told us that they indeed had not had contact for 30 years. So it just seemed to be a wonderful old, long-lost friend that somehow the Prime Minister was reacquainted with after he became Prime Minister, while the Aga Khan was doing a whole bunch of business with the Government of Canada. Now, the point is that the point and most likely why the Prime Minister and his staff took such a posture of great secrecy is that we actually have ethical rules. We have ethics rules in place which are meant to prevent Prime Ministers or ministers or parliamentarians, even without executive responsibilities, from doing things which put them in a conflict of interest. Things like accepting free vacations from those who do multi-million-dollar transactions with the government. Things like accepting free rides in their private helicopters. Things like recusing oneself from discussions where the opportunity exists to improperly further that other person's interests. And fourthly, things like failing to arrange one's own affairs in a manner to avoid these conflicts of interest. Now, Madam Speaker, those were the 4 areas that the Prime Minister broke the ethics rules in, those exact areas that I mentioned. These rules are in place to stop a Prime Minister from doing this, but in a very shameful historic ruling, we have seen our own Prime Minister break these 4 specific rules. Now, that's why my honourable friend, the Leader of the Official Opposition, wrote to Mary Dawson, then the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, asking for an investigation of the Prime Minister's conduct. And that's why the Ethics Commissioner in turn conducted an investigation and produced a thorough 66-page report called the Trudeau Report on the Prime Minister's vacation. And that's why the Ethics Commissioner reported her findings that the Conflict of Interest Act had been violated in 4 separate ways. And let's keep in mind, Madam Speaker, the Conflict of Interest Act is a law. So for anybody who said, well, the Prime Minister didn't break the law, he did, in fact, break the law. The Conflict of Interest Act was a piece of legislation that our government brought into effect. It was passed here in the House of Commons. It is in law, and the Prime Minister broke that law. There is no way to sugarcoat it or to whitewash it. Now, Mary Dawson's investigation confirmed what any sensible and reasonable observer would have told you, that the Prime Minister's free luxury vacation on a private Caribbean island owned by someone with dealings with the federal government simply didn't pass the sniff test. You know, Madam Speaker, many have looked at the value of these 3 vacations. They probably value close to $700,000. When you look at the value of not only the vacation itself, the RCMP time, which was used for this vacation, which the Prime Minister has refused to pay that back, close to $700,000. Can you imagine a Minister of the Crown receiving an envelope of cash with $700,000 in it from somebody who is dealing with that minister, and that individual, here's a free gift of $700,000 worth of cash, and that minister going on and making decisions regarding the work that this individual was doing? Madam Speaker, the fact that this is basically what our Prime Minister did is reprehensible. And the fact that he refuses to take responsibility for it is even more irresponsible. And it goes to show how the Prime Minister has failed Canadians in his dealings, in how he has been unethical and shown such horrendous judgment time and time again. Now, Madam Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner also unearthed that the Prime Minister and his family, as I said, accepted similar vacations when he was leader of the third party, and that his wife, children, and their whole host of friends accepted another third vacation in March 2016. Now, we do thank the former Ethics Commissioner for her work and her analysis on this serious issue. The report, though, and the public discussions about it has exposed a serious concern for us as Conservatives, and I think for indeed the entire House of Commons. When we read the report that addressed the unethical and illegal vacation, we learned that during this Caribbean sojourn, the Prime Minister and the Aga Khan exchanged gifts. Receiving a present during a gifted vacation, Madam Speaker, talk about piling it on. It's kind of like a nesting doll. You know, these nesting dolls that get piled on one after the other, and you keep opening up the doll and there's another doll and another doll, but this isn't very dollish at all. In fact, it's probably the opposite. So what kind of gifts are we talking about? I almost say what kind of dolls are we talking about? Well, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasswood, himself a skilled journalist, sought to get to the bottom of the mystery, and so he asked an order paper question to find out what kind of gifts the Prime Minister received from the Aga Khan. Instead, now it would seem that the same PMO staff who first handled the communication of the Bahamas trip fielded this question, and this is what we heard back from the government. Basically, no disclosure. The Prime Minister just said, I disclosed all gifts, and to the Ethics Commissioner as part of the examination. Bottom line, Madam Speaker, is the Prime Minister did not disclose the illegal gifts. He said he received a bag. We don't know if it was a duffel bag that one might get at Winners or a Louis Vuitton bag worth many thousands of dollars. We don't know, Madam Speaker, because the Prime Minister won't tell us. Now, the Prime Minister has to disclose gifts under a certain amount, but these illegal gifts that he's received, he has not had to disclose. And when we've asked him time and time again, he's refused to. Now, Madam Speaker, this concern and this legal gap was not Mary Dawson's fault. and it's something that needs to be addressed in the conflict of interest code. So, Madam Speaker, with that, we need to get to the bottom of the gift exchange, and we need to close the loophole so that this does not continue. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm somewhat disappointed in the official opposition in the sense that what's really important to Canadians is what's happening in their everyday life in the communities across our country. The Prime Minister has complied with the Commissioner. Mary Dawson did an outstanding job in terms of looking into the matter. We responded, we appreciated the fine work that Mary Dawson had done, and we continue to want to move on in recognizing what it is that's important to Canadians. On the one hand, we could see those benefits where Canada's middle class continues to grow and get healthier, which gives us more strength in our economy. Madam Speaker, we see that some of the tangible examples, such as the hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been created. We can see that in terms of some of the social programming that's been put forward. Now, as this government has been focused on what Canadians want government to do, the opposition continues its preoccupation of character assassination, whether it's the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, or anyone else that they believe that they can point a finger and say that's a bad person. They can continue those personal assassinations, Madam Speaker. We, on the other hand, will continue to fight for our middle-class Canadians and those that are aspiring to be a part of it and those that are being challenged.
The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Madam Speaker, what Canadians have seen for the last 2 years is a Prime Minister who continues to fail them. He has made promises during the campaign, and when he was elected, he abdicated and reneged on every single one of those promises. And we have never in the history of this Parliament seen a Prime Minister convicted of breaking 4 ethics codes laws, Madam Speaker. This Prime Minister, and he brought up the Minister of Finance as well, increasing taxes on Canadians, failing our energy sector, failing the men and women in Canada who are working in our natural resources sector, who don't have Aga Khan billionaire friends to give them free island vacations worth $700,000. Madam Speaker, Canadians are working hard every day. They don't have 2 full-time nannies paid for by the taxpayer. They don't have trips abroad where they're thankfully making fools like the Prime Minister made a fool of himself on the India trip. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister is using Canadians' taxpayers' dollars. He's using his position to advance himself. He's using his position to promote himself. And Madam Speaker, Canadians are saying it's time this Prime Minister stops acting like a fool.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for bringing up this very important issue. The reality is, in the last election, we had somebody say that they were going to do things different, that there was going to be more transparency, that there was going to be more accountability. And what we're seeing here is a serious loophole, which is when you are given an illegal gift, you do not have to report it. And I think we have to come back to the basics here of accountability to Canadians. And I think we have to stop having discussions from this government trying to say, well, everyday Canadians are interested in other things besides this. This is something that is about the ethics of the leader of our country. So I would ask the member to talk a little bit about why this loophole is so huge and how come this government isn't taking steps to close it.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, and I thank my colleague for that question. I think what we've seen with a pattern with this government is they seem to find every loophole that they can so that they can use it to their advantage. We saw them do this, Madam Speaker, very early on after the election, where the ministers were doing fundraisers with stakeholders, and they were raising hundreds of thousands of dollars with the very same people that they were working with in their ministerial portfolio. This is after the Prime Minister had said that they should be arranging their affairs in a manner that could bear the most strongest scrutiny. Well, they said, Madam Speaker, they said there's no rules that forbid us from doing that. We said, why aren't you obeying the spirit of the law not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And honestly, Madam Speaker, if the Liberals would just even follow the spirit of the law of the Ethics Commissioner's requests, we wouldn't have this problem. If we didn't have a Prime Minister that thinks he's entitled to all the fancy holidays and everything being paid for by the taxpayer and by anybody else that he can get to take advantage of, Madam Speaker, we wouldn't have this problem. But we've got the same old Liberals in government who are constantly trying to advance their own interests. So yes, we have to close this loophole to ensure the Liberals don't find ways to take advantage of these kinds of things.